Well, listen, thank you very much, everyone, for your time. This is the clinic for the Festival Investment Scheme. So it's the applicants clinic. And this is for any applicant that is considering applying into either of the two rounds of Festival Investment. So th this presentation takes about an hour. I will do my very best to be as efficient on time as I can. But as you can see on the front of the slide, we have what are called qualifying dates. So the Festival Investment Scheme we run it twice in a year. So it has two rounds, round one and round two. Round one, which is currently open at the moment, has deadlines for applications on Thursday, the 29th of May, and it's for festivals that are going to take place between the 1st of January and the 30th of June in 2026. And round two is for festivals that commence between the 1st of July and the 31st of December 2026. Your round is round two, and that opens in October and closes in November. So these are what we call the qualifying dates for the round. So you can only apply into the round which matches the date of your festival. So what I'm going to do is cover three areas in the presentation for you. So the first is the award. So I'm going to cover some general information, the purpose and priorities of the award, how it works, who can apply, and how much you can apply for. So you have a good overview of the scheme. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the application proposal that you would submit through the scheme. So that covers things like your organization, your festival proposal, what you want to do, who is it for, how much it will cost, and how you will manage it, and then what supporting materials you'll provide with your application. And then finally, just the next steps, which is about what happens to your application. So when do you get a result? What should you expect of the process? And then things that you might want to consider when you're making an application. Okay, so the first section is really about understanding the award. So this is just some general information to cover with you, which is the Festival Investment Scheme is something that is called a non-recurring scheme at the Arts Council, which means that any funding that is offered on a once-off basis. So if you are an organization that regularly applies or is seeking to apply again into the scheme and you have been funded, you should be aware that this is a one-off scheme, so you shouldn't automatically assume that you will receive funding again. So it's always good to just be aware of that. Other things are that there have been an increasing number of first-time applicants into the scheme. And obviously, the Arts Council welcomes any festival applications. But as you can see from the charts that are listed there on the slides, there has been an increase over the last couple of years of first-time applicants. And the level of success of first-time applicants is currently at around 13%. So anyone that's on the call that's thinking of applying for the first time, just be aware of that percentage. The competitive context is quite challenging in this scheme. The other thing to be aware of is that in the last year, we have only been able to provide awards at full request to 15% of applicants into the scheme. So obviously that has something that has reduced over time because we are receiving a higher demand in terms of financial request, and we're also receiving more applicants into the scheme. And the average award that was offered across 2025 last year in the scheme was just over €15,000. So the purpose of the Festival Investment Scheme is for the Arts Council to support a really diverse and varied arts ecology. And what we mean by that is this scheme is designed to support small and mid-scale festivals to deliver very high quality experiences to audiences and support the development of art form and artist work locally with their communities across the country. One of the things that's important to remember is that the festival ecology is very diverse. So we welcome applications from different kinds of festivals, whether you're an annual festival, a biennial model, or whether you're a single art form festival, or whether you host a number of different art forms, which we refer to as multidisciplinary arts. So I'm just going to start by outlining, you'll see this slide again later on, just sort of outlining for you the process and the scheme structure. So the first thing is choosing the application band that is relevant to your festival. Once you've chosen your application and you submit it through the online system, you must do that before the deadline date. So the deadline dates were provided for you at the beginning of the presentation. But something that's always good to remember to have in the back of your mind is that the Arts Council always has its closing date for applications on a Thursday at 5:30. So I'll come back to this slide a bit later as we progress. But the first thing I'm going to do is talk to you about the selection of the band for your application into the scheme. So in Festival Investment, we have what we call 3 bands of investment, A, B, and C. We can't tell you or we can't instruct you on which band to select, but what we do is provide you with some parameters. And there are some caveats to which band you can apply into. So band A is we suggest for small festivals or new festivals that want to test some new ideas, or a festival that's in the early stage of development. You can apply for up to €10,000 in that band. So that's the what we call the financial band limit for that band. In A is €10,000. In band B, you can apply for amounts between 10,001 and 25,000. However, in order to qualify for band B, your organization must have been established for 3 years and have executed or operated 3 consecutive festival programs as a minimum requirement. And band C, the minimum requirement is 5 years, and you can apply for funding between 25,001 and 45,000. You'll see at the bottom of each slide, there is underneath the green line, there is a little reference note. So when we provide you with these slides later on today, you'll see that any information on the slide refers back to the guidelines and the application form. So you can always find the reference point as you go through those documents. So some of the questions we get are really about, well, if I apply into one band, what happens, and can I apply into more than one band? So the simple answer is you can only choose one band. That's all you can apply into, and you can only apply into one band per calendar year. So when you apply into the Festival Investment Scheme, you choose your band, and then you make the application on that basis. If you're applying into the higher bands, which are B or C, you should be aware that your application could be moved into a lower band if we consider that the information you've provided is not sufficient, or it might be moved into a lower band if the budgetary context is challenging and we're unable to provide an award at that level. So in theory, if you apply into a band, you might expect to receive an award within the band limit, but sometimes our budgets are challenging and we may have to make a lower offer. And the Arts Council just reserves the right to award less in circumstances where it considers that the information that you may have provided in the application matches a lower band of investment. So you just need to be aware that if you apply into the higher bands, you can get a lower award, or your application can be moved. We don't move applications upwards. So if you apply into band A, it would stay in band A, or if you apply into band B, it doesn't move into C. So the first thing I'm going to point out is for recurring applicants. So anyone that's applied into the Festival Investment Scheme before, there's a new section in the guidance, and it's in 1.1. It's called About the Award in the guidelines. And this identifies changes to the Festival Investment Scheme. So we have made some changes to both the guidelines and the application form. I won't go into detail, but I will cover some of those changes as we progress through the clinic. So I won't go into detail here, but you can see that they're specifically listed for you and they tell you exactly where the changes are in both of those documents. The other thing to advise you on, which might be helpful, is the language in the guidance. So there can be quite a lot of information to digest because the guidelines are quite lengthy. So this is a good rule of thumb just to remember. If you see in the guidance the term must, this is an instruction to you. It's compulsory. So when you see that listed either in the application form or in the guidelines, you must complete the request. Should is a recommendation, so it's not compulsory, but when you see it in either of those two documents, you should consider the request. And may is optional. So when you see that, you may wish to follow the request depending on what the question is or what the guidance is. So we have updated some of this part of the guidance, which is in relation to who can apply and who cannot apply. So if you are a festival organization or an organization that runs a festival resident in the Republic of Ireland, you can apply into the scheme. You must ensure that your festival dates qualify. So if you're applying again into round one between January and the end of June 26, and round two, beginning of July to the end of December. You also need to make sure, in order to apply, that you qualify for the band requirement. So if you're applying into Band A, there's no restriction around the amount of time or the amount of festivals you operate. But B is a minimum of 3 years and C minimum of 5, which we've covered before. And you can only make one application in the Festival Investment Scheme in any calendar year in one band. The other area that we have updated is who cannot apply into the scheme. So I'm just going to cover the highlighted areas. So if you're an individual, you cannot apply. Unfortunately, only organizations are able to apply for the Festival Investment Scheme. You need to be aware that if your organization is in receipt of strategic funding, partnership funding, or arts centre funding, which are all Arts Council schemes, you are not able to apply for the Festival Investment Scheme. And if your organization has applied for, so that's for 2026, or in your receipt of arts grant funding for 2025 to undertake any festival program, then you aren't able to apply for the Festival Investment Scheme. Similarly, if your organization is directly funded by the department, which is the Department of Tourism, Culture, Arts, Gaeltacht Sports and Media, for a festival program, then you can't apply into this scheme, unfortunately. And the last two areas to highlight are the bottom two, where if your festival organization has, as a dominant feature of your program, non-arts based work, which might be heritage, food, sports, role playing, stand-up comedy, for example, you cannot apply into the scheme. And just to emphasize there the word dominant feature. So it doesn't mean that if you're an arts festival and you have some of those aspects, like you might have some food events or heritage events, that's okay, as long as the dominant element of your program is arts related. If you have questions about that, you should contact the festival's team and you should make explicit in your application that your program is arts related or has a dominant aspect of arts related work in it. Also, programs that have no public benefits, such as professional development programs, conventions or conferences and trade fairs. So where there is no benefit to the public, again, you can't apply into the scheme. So what is the purpose of the Festival Investment Scheme? So uh, our purpose is to support the diverse festival ecology. However, what we're also looking for, exampled in what we're looking for in the applications, is a couple of key areas where you satisfy the Arts Council's requirement, which is to develop artistic quality programs, so festival programs that demonstrate artistic excellence, and also programs that show a commitment to the Arts Council's art form priorities. And I'll come to that a little bit later. Programs that also demonstrate really good festival practice. So, what we consider good financial management, a good track record, also an ability and evidence to deliver a festival project for the public. And then we have priority areas in the award, which are public engagement, festival priorities, and equality, diversity, and inclusion. So I'll come to those a little bit later, certainly around the priorities, so that you have a clearer understanding. There are areas where we consider specific practice areas as non-priorities. So one of those is ongoing events. So it's an ongoing event series. So that might be um, a book club or a literature or music series that happens every month as a regular event over a calendar year. So those are non-priorities for the scheme. We're very much focused on supporting and providing funding supports for festival programs. Arts programs that are primarily delivered on are delivered with and having a focus on a workshop series or a summer series or schools or classes. And also a new addition to non-priorities are festivals that are taking place at the same time and in the same location as a festival that is currently supported by the Arts Council's strategic funding program. So if there is an organization on the call today that has a program that happens at the same time and in the same location as another festival that's supported by the Arts Council through that program, do get in touch with us. It doesn't mean you can't apply to the scheme, but what you have to do is absolutely evidence in your application that the work of your festival is completely distinct to the work of the other festival that's happening at the same time. So what can you apply for when you're applying to the Festival Investment Scheme? So to keep it fairly simple and high level, you can apply for any festival activity. So that might be anything that you can see there on the left-hand side of the screen, which includes artist fees, hiring venues, supporting your marketing, your technical development, travel costs for artists, anything to do with your audiences, and a contribution to some festival program archiving. So anything that supports the activity to take place, enable artists to be part of it and for the public. And you can also apply for disability access costs, which I will come to a bit later. And then areas that you cannot apply for are activities that are non-arts related. So you might have some non-arts related events in your festival program. That's fine as long as they're not the dominant feature, and as long as then you're not asking for Arts Council subvention for those areas. We don't support training programs, and we do not support activities for fundraising purposes. And just make sure that if you run any competitive events, that again, you're not using public funding to give out cash prizes, for example. We don't support activities outside of the Republic of Ireland, and we don't support any capital costs, which is small capital purchases or large capital purchases. So it's purely for programming and the activity of the festival program and events. So when you have outlined, as you're making your preparations for your festival, the areas that you want to apply for, when you make the application, again, you're making it under one of these three bands. And there's a small change to the way that we've asked you now to make your application. So if you're making an application under Band A, the absolute maximum request is 10,000. You cannot, under any circumstances, go over that amount. Band B is 25,000 and Band C is 45,000. You can apply for disability access costs, and this is where it has changed from previous years. So you can apply for two different types of disability access cost. One is called participant and or personal disability costs. And this is where you may have particular costs that support artists that are wanting to be part or taking part in your program. And these costs are to facilitate the removal of barriers. So that might be to support an individual and to support production staff or to support anyone that is involved in your program. These are individual costs. And you can make an additional funding request for these particular costs. So you can't exceed the maximum in your band, but you can make an additional request. And I will show you a little bit later how you do that. Audience disability access costs can also be applied for, but you must roll these costs into your existing expenditure. So you can't make an additional request for these. This has to be part and parcel of your overall expenditure of your festival program. And that might be things such as having an ISL interpreter for a performance, or you might have particular temporary kind of access requirements like ramps, for example, or an audio description service. So anything artist or participant related, you can apply for as an additional request. Anything for audience access costs must be included in your overall festival expenditure. So now we might come on to the application. So this is how you set out your proposal. I'm going to go through the application form, which you can access through the OLS system. You download it. And I'll provide you with some more information. So we'll go through the different sections for you. So your application proposal to the Festival Investment Scheme consists of a number of documents. So the first one is the Festival Investment Scheme application form. And the second is supporting documentation. So these are supporting materials which are separate to and in addition to your application form. So just to note, because this is really important, is all these documents must be submitted via the Arts Council's online system, which we call OLS. We don't accept application materials by post, in person, or email under any circumstances. So either before or after the deadline. So just be really, really clear about that. Only through OLS. So the Festival Investment Scheme application form is based on a project plan template. So the idea is that after you've completed the application form, you should have a very good overview and structure of your festival program. We've broken the application form into 7 sections, and I'm going to go through each of those with you now. We've also provided you with some timings for each section. This is a general guide. Obviously, people will work at different speeds, but a couple of things just to bear in mind is we estimate that the application form now takes about 10 to 15 hours to complete. So we strongly advise that you start that application form, as soon as you can and give yourself plenty of time. It's not possible to complete the application form if you start it on the day of the application deadline. So just to bear that in mind, it's highly unlikely you would complete it. You should also give yourself a bit of time at the end to read over, or we do advise if you get somebody else to read over, it's actually very helpful. And you'll see this come up a couple of times as I progress, which is please make sure you complete every section in the application form. If something is not relevant, put not applicable or NA, but do not leave any section blank because a blank section in the application form renders it ineligible and it won't be assessed. So really important that you make sure that you fill out every section. So the first section you'll come to, and I'll cover some aspects of the application form here, but the first section you'll come to is the general section. So what we ask you to do here is to choose your funding band. So as I outlined earlier, it's going to be one of the 3 bands. So I'm going to take you through an example here. So this is for a festival for young people and children, and I'm a Band C applicant, so I'm going to tick Band C in the application form. And then this will be familiar to organizations that have applied before, but this is where you outline the art form or the arts practice relevant to your application. And just to highlight here that this section has changed. And what you do now is you only select one art form area. You can't select more than one. If you do select more than one, the application will not upload onto the system. So in this particular case, my festival is for children and young people. So I select that. And then anything else that's a secondary art form area, you don't select those anymore. So just be aware of that. So just tick one of the areas most relevant to your application form. So the second section is about your organization. So we ask you here to sort of fill out the year that your organization was formed and the amount of festivals that have taken place. So this allows us to double check your application is in the right band, and also lets us know how long your organization has been running. If you're a new festival, you would place new, and then the number of festivals is 0. And there is some information provided to allow you to fill that out correctly. So you should make sure that you complete that. And the second section is proof of your most recent festival program. So again, if you're a new festival, you would put new, but what you would provide us with are CVs. So we do require, if you're a new festival, to provide us with information about who's running the festival and who's managing it. If you're a festival that has been running for a number of years, you can provide us with a web link to your festival program. As you can see, we filled that out there at the bottom of the page. And if you don't have a website, you can provide a PDF document of that program. If you don't provide the festival program from your previous festival iteration, it may just affect your assessment score. So we always advise you to provide the most up-to-date program information for us because it gives assessors a really good flavor of what you've been doing and what you've tried to achieve and your track record. You should be aware that managing the hyperlink, if you give us a festival web link, is your responsibility because the assessor will at any time after you've submitted your application be looking at it. So just make sure if you're providing a web link, it is up to date. Okay, so continued in the section about your organization is a summary called "Tell us about your organization." So that's just a brief summary of who you are and what you do. So that provides the assessors with information on your festival, and it allows us to understand the scope of your work. And we also want you to tell us in section 2.4 who's involved in the festival. So here we provided you with a few examples. So you might list the artists in your program, the committee members running your festival, anyone else that's relevant to your activity and your proposal, you list them in this section. Section 3 is the more substantial part of the application form, which is about your proposal. So here we want you to, first of all, tell us the name of your festival because it might be different to your organization. We want you to tell us the dates and the location. And we need that information that's essential in order for us to make sure that your application is eligible and that it's in the qualifying dates that we mentioned earlier. So absolutely include that information. And secondly, we want to see a summary here of your proposal. So some festivals decide to write their proposal and then summarize it afterwards. It's entirely up to you. But the summary of the proposal is 3 or 4 short bullet points that sort of tell us what you want to do and what your festival program is proposing and what it's about. And you then elaborate on that summary in this section here called your proposal, which is section 3.3. And here, this is to help the Arts Council find out what your festival program is, how it demonstrates artistic quality, and what your art form priorities are. So, what you should write here to help those assessing your application is they'll want to understand what's in your program, who it will feature, what you want to do, and why you want to do it, and what activities will be presented, and what we are called outputs or outcomes will be. So, what will we see, and what will it achieve? This particular part of the application form is focused on artistic quality, so it's really important to tell us about either your vision or the artists involved in your program and what you want to do. The other thing that's very important, and we mentioned this earlier, is the Arts Council's art form priorities. So you will see at the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, this guides you to section 3.3 of the guidelines. And in that section, there is a table which you can see partly demonstrated there called Table 3. And what you want to do is look for the art form area under which you're applying. So in this case, I run a festival for children and young people. So I look specifically at the section on children and young people to see what the priorities are for the Arts Council in that specific art form area. So in this part of the proposal, you want to talk about the project you're running, but you also want to make sure that you are meeting with the priority areas for art forms under the art form area that you're applying. So I think a little bit earlier we touched on the priorities of the award, and there are three specific areas in the priorities of the award. So here we want to find out how the work of your festival meets with these three areas of interest to the Arts Council. They are public engagement, festival priorities, and equality, diversity, and inclusion. So I'll go over those in a bit more detail for you. So I'll start with equality, diversity, and inclusion. So how does your organization consider equality and diversity? So how does it select artists? How does it select personnel, volunteers, or staffing? Is there a diversity breakdown in your committee? So it's really about how the organization in all the aspects of festival making considers diversity. Do you have diversity in your public engagement plans? So how you work with volunteers or how you attract audiences? And do you have any planning or training or policies? So it's always really good to sort of outline to us in this particular part of the application how you consider equality and diversity. Festival priorities is focused on a number of areas. One is about the partnerships that you're building or the collaborations you have. Those partnerships can be with local organizations, they can be with artists, they can be with other arts organizations. So it's really good for us to understand how you will deliver on these partnerships and how it strengthens the purpose and the work of your festival. We sometimes ask you to evidence this, and you can evidence these partnerships through what we call letters of support or a memorandum of understanding, and I'll come to those a bit later. We also ask you to consider and to demonstrate to us how you support work that is being developed locally. So, how you support the practice of local artists, and also how your festival is integrated into its place and its community. So, why is your festival particularly relevant to the place in which it takes place or the community in which it serves? And then finally, public engagement. So the Arts Council considers public engagement in three different ways. Participation, which is people taking part in activities, that might be a class or a workshop, volunteering, and audiences. So we want to know what your plans and goals are for public engagement, how you measure the success of that, and how do you sustain any audiences that you currently have over the years? Or if you're a new festival, how are you intending to attract those audiences to your new project? So as part of this section around award priorities, we have updated this section. So this again is a change to the application form. So you would have seen before a very brief table asking us to give you some info to give us some information on audience numbers. So we have updated this section now, and we're asking you to provide us with your estimated public engagement activity for 2026. And if you have been operating before 26, your figures for 25 and 2024. Just to say, if your festival hasn't taken place in 2025, at the time that you fill out the application, you should just estimate the figures. So that's absolutely fine. But again, don't leave it blank. And if you have been a previous applicant to the Festival Investment Scheme, you will be able to take the figures from your report form for the previous years of 24 and 25 and place them into this table. So it should be fairly easy to do. It shouldn't be too difficult. If you're a new festival, then obviously you would put in 24 and 25, not applicable. So you'll notice that underneath that table, and I won't go into too much detail, but underneath that table, there are notes to assist applicants. So you'll see that every number in the table has a corresponding number with instructions. So you can have a look at those as you go through the table. So I'm just going to fill this in. So I'm outlining here the number of performances that I estimate for 26 and the number of workshops. We don't have any exhibitions. And then what we achieved in previous years. And then I'm just going to total that. I'm going to do the same thing for audiences or participants in my festival program. So whoever's assessing the application can see that there's a small incremental rise there in participation and audiences. That's for live in-person events. Don't have anything happening for digital events. I'm totaling it. And then I'm also putting in the number of volunteers that work with our festival. So filling out the entire table, making sure it's all completed as part of that aspect of the form. So after you've addressed the award priorities, we're going to ask you about the financial management of your project. So this part of the application form helps us to understand how you budget your festival program, what your costs are, what income you're estimating, and how you might be managing your project financially. So in this section, this is where you also make your financial request support to the Arts Council. So you will see 7 sections in this form, and I'll take you through them step by step. So the first one that you're going to see, and this is a change to the regular application form, is a section called Disability Access Costs. So we covered this earlier. And what you must do is answer the question in 5.1. So there are 2 questions there, which is, are you applying for personal or participant disability access costs? And are you applying for audience disability access costs? If you answer yes to either of those questions, you must follow the instructions listed below. And if you answer no, you proceed to the next section, which is 5.2. So in this case, I am going to have costs for participants and personal disability. And in this example, I also have audience disability access costs. Okay, so audience disability access costs, as we covered before, must be included in your overall budget expenditure, and my costs that are required for personal access costs can be an additional funding request. So here you will see an example of what we call the income and expenditure budget form in the application form. This has been pre-populated a little bit. So this is all the expenditure related to your festival. So you'll see there's a small change here to the section called artistic costs. And what we would like you to do in this section is break down in as much detail costs that you have in relation to the artistic aspect of your festival program. So here you can see that I've put in some costs for commissions, performance fees, and workshop fees. So I've given detail on how I've calculated them, and I've also given the total cost. And then you can see there are other parts of the application form where I'm outlining production and technical costs. And you can see that I have put my audience disability costs in under that section. So it's included in the total expenditure. And what I'm going to do is add up all of those amounts. And so I have a total. So that's my total expenditure. Included in my expenditure, you'll see just above the total, there is a line there called in-kind expenditure. So this is what we call benefit in kind. And this is something that is given for free, but has a cash value. So benefit in kind might be something like volunteering. So you might sort of put a cash value on the amount of hours that volunteers contribute to your festival. Or you might have a venue that gives you a little bit of space for free and there's a cash value to it. So the total amount of that benefit in kind must go into that line. It shouldn't go anywhere else on the expenditure sheet, only on that line. So the next section is income. So here we ask you to estimate what your income will be, some of which you will know and some of which you won't. So any estimated income is pending, and any income that you may have confirmed through grants or sponsorship will be considered confirmed. So there is a section in the form for you to be able to outline whether it's confirmed or pending. And you will also see that there is another line there for in-kind income. So just to be very clear, whatever figure that you put under in-kind expenditure in the previous section must match, must be the same figure that goes into this part of the income form as well, so that actually they balance each other out. And just a note here for any festivals that are ticketing events and asking audience to pay for tickets. This will be what we call box office income. And if you include box office income as an item, you must tell us how you've estimated that now. So this is additional. So as you'll see here, I'm just filling that out. And I'm seeing that my venue capacity is 1,000. I think I'm going to have 300 people attending at €10. So the capacity is 30%, and that gives me my total. So I'm giving the assessor and the people looking at my application an indication of how I break down my income. And now I'm going to fill out the rest of the form where I indicate where those particular areas of other estimated income are coming from, whether some of them are confirmed with a C or a pending with a P. And then I'm going to make sure that my in-kind income is the same as amount in terms of figure that are placed in the expenditure line. And I'm also going to then total my income so that I get a figure that I can move forward onto the next section. So the next section is calculating your funding request to the Arts Council. So all I'm doing is taking the totals from each one of those sections and placing them in here. So I'm placing my total income figure and my total expenditure figure. And then in order to calculate your funding request, you need to ensure that you take your income away from your expenditure. So as you can see here, the total amount, I can't see it on my screen, but I think it's around 36,000. So that is the shortfall. So effectively what you're asking for is the shortfall, the difference between your expenditure and your income. And what you also need to ensure is that the request of funding falls within the limit of the award. So I'm asking here for an amount that I know that I'm allowed to ask for because the maximum limit in band C is 45,000. So I'm asking for within that limit. So I'm just double checking that I've ensured that I'm within the band limit of the particular band I'm applying under. So if you have personal or participant disability access costs, again, you don't exceed the band limit, but here is where you are able to make an additional funding request. So in this particular case, because I've ticked the box before to say, yes, I have participation costs, I'm going to list those costs here. And what I'm also asked to do at another part of the as another part of the application process is to provide a breakdown of that funding on a breakdown of those costs on a separate document. So I'm putting in here the total amount. So in this case, it's 5,000. And this allows the assessor to understand that you're requesting those additional costs for access. We're also going to ask you in this part of the financial management section of the application how you consider paying condition for artists. So as you know, one of the uh, key aspects of our funding is to ensure that artists are remunerated properly and fairly. So we are asking you to outline how you know that your artists are being paid fairly. How do you benchmark the fees? Do you have any research that you undertake? And how do you ensure that your artists are provided with fair conditions and payment? And you should ensure that what you write here matches the information you've provided in your budget expenditure as well. So you just want to make sure that if you're saying that artists receive a certain rate of pay, that actually that's reflected in your budget as well. And the other section is just around how you manage your budget. So we'd like to know what fail safes you might have in place, financial protections, or how you manage your budgets within your organization structure. You know, is there a system for managing finances, and how do you do that, and how do you protect the public money? Okay, so section 6, which is the penultimate section of the application form, is about project management. So this is to help us understand how you manage your festival program from planning through to delivery, through to evaluation, so execution and evaluation. So in this section, you should expect to see a number of different questions. The first is a new section called project research. You do not need to answer this question if you are not a new festival. So if your festival has been operating for a number of years, just put not applicable in this section and move on to the next question. If you are a new festival, we want to find out what research you've undertaken in relation to your festival program. So are you aware of other festivals operating in the area? How do you know that your festival is distinct from those festivals? Are you servicing a particular demographic? How do you know that they want your festival? What is the demand for your festival? So what we want to find out is what kind of research have you done before you're proposing the idea of your new festival program? If you're a recurring applicant or you're a festival that has operated a number of programs, and if you're a new festival, we're asking you also to fill out the other sections, which is around organization and delivery. So this is how your festival is managed. So what's the expertise or experience of those people running the festival, and what's the structure of your festival organization? So if you're a new festival, you might outline some of the experience that you've provided in your CVs. If you're a festival that's run a number of iterations, you might outline the management structure and who looks after what aspects of the delivery of the program. Section 3 is an activity plan. This is where we ask you to give us milestone dates in terms of your planning, your execution, and your delivery. So that might be when you put your program in place, your program deadline, your marketing deadlines, work that you do year round, when you plan to deliver the program, and when you plan to evaluate your festival. And then finally, the evaluation section is just a brief summary to tell us what steps you take to evaluate your festival program. So do you undertake surveys with your audience, or do you speak to your artists? Do you do a reflection and review piece at the end of your project? So anything that you do that helps you to understand what you've achieved and how you've achieved it and how you benchmark it is helpful for us to know just in terms of how you review your own performance. So the last section of the application form is a checklist which outlines the supporting documentation, which again, as we mentioned earlier, is separate to your application form. So I'm just going to cover the different kinds of documentation. So there's mandatory support materials. This is where you must upload this documentation with your application. If you don't include mandatory support materials, they're deemed ineligible. If relevant, is any documentation that is required for your application. So, for example, that could be if you're working with animals or you have animals presented in your festival, you would need to provide an animal welfare statement. Optional is fairly self-explanatory, which means you can provide additional materials if you think it strengthens the case of your proposal, and not required is again self-explanatory, so you don't need to provide those materials if we don't call for them. So just note that, and I'll go through this in a bit more detail, that the supporting material you are required to provide with your application depends on the band that you select. So you will see this checklist in your application form. It's not as colorful as this, but you will see that under each band, there is a specific requirement. So under bands A, B, and C, you will see that there are mandatory areas, mandatory documentation that you have to provide. So just to be very clear, if you're a band A applicant and you are not a new festival, so you're applying for a festival program that you've delivered before, there are no mandatory requirements for you. If you are a new festival applying into Band A, you are required to provide two mandatory documents, and I'll go over those in a second. In Band B, you are required to provide letters of what we call agreement or letters of support, and there's a maximum of 3 letters you can provide. In Band C, we ask you to provide a minimum of 5 letters of support, and we also ask you to provide a strategic or festival development plan. So in this case, I'm a Band C applicant. So I know that I have to provide the mandatory letters of support and a strategic plan. So I'm going to make sure that I check that off as I go. But also I know that I'm applying for participant disability access costs. So in this case, I have to provide a document listing line by line those costs, and I put that in with my application. Again, anything that is required as mandatory that you don't supply deems your application ineligible. So just be aware of that. Okay, so I'm going to cover, first of all, mandatory support materials with you. So if you are applying into Band A, the only requirement for mandatory support materials is new festivals. So what we require is CVs of those managing your festival. So this gives us an understanding of the track record of the people planning to deliver the festival. And again, if you go to table 2 in the guidance, or the applicant guidance, it will provide you with details of what is required and how to prepare them as well. And the other thing that we ask you to provide is a draft program of events. So you must provide this document. There is no set format for it, but you may wish to consider providing a breakdown of your program or a timetable, the artists that are involved, or even a curatorial statement, something that gives us an indication of what you're planning to program. So you can, if you're not a new festival, you can provide a draft program if you want to as optional, but it's only mandatory in the case if you're a new festival. So in bands B and C, we ask for letters of support, which I've covered. So letters of support, if you haven't provided them before, are written statements as made by either an organization or an individual in support of your program. So that can be from an artist, it can be from a funder, it can be from a community organization or an arts organization. And you have to decide, you know, what type of letters that you might want to provide, which gives the assessors a good indication of your partnerships and gives a good indication of the kind of people that you're going to work with. So you might want a variety of different stakeholders evidencing their support. And in those letters, they can provide either an indication of what they might do or what they might support you with. And that can be in kind, or it can be cash, or it can be a program or an event. So it's just whatever you think makes the case. You should just be aware that we are looking for these letters to indicate that they are in support of your future program. So this is 2026, not previous programs that you've delivered in the past. We only accept letters which are letters of support for your proposed program, so the program you're putting into your application. And you should really think about putting these all into one document if you can. If you're applying into Band C, you must ensure that one of those letters is from the local authority. So that can be from any department in the local authority, but it must be from the local authority indicating their support for your project. If you don't want to provide a letter of support, you can provide an MOU. And on the Festival Investment page on the Arts Council's website, you'll find a template for this. And an MOU is a memorandum of understanding. It's a simple agreement between parties. So you agree that something might be provided and you have an agreement and it sets out what that agreement is. Often it's an informal agreement that says, subject to all monies being in place, these things can happen between our two organizations or between our parties. So in the case where you might have multiple partners, so you might have 6 or 7 partners and you can't put in 6 or 7 letters of support, you might want to put all of the partners in one MOU and if they're all part of one project, and then you can put that in as one document. And then finally, for Band C applicants, the other mandatory requirement is the festival development plan. So this has a number of different names. It can be a strategic plan, a business plan, a development plan. If you have one of these already, you can upload it with your application, or you should upload it with your application. If you don't have a published plan, there is a template available for you on the Arts Council's website on the festival investment page. And your strategic plan is a plan that outlines your operational actions or your roadmap for your organization to cover the period of your festival that you're applying for and into the future. And what is stated in your strategic plan should complement the proposal that you're putting into your application form. So those were the mandatory supports. The relevant supports are areas where you might actually provide an application where you need to provide some additional support. So in this particular instance, that could be an animal welfare statement, or it could be participant and disability access costs. So if that's relevant to your application, you should upload these documents as additional. If you don't upload these documents, your application is still eligible, but it just means that we won't consider, in relation to participation and disability access costs, we won't consider those costs for support. So in terms of eligibility, you should make sure that you look at this in the application guidance. So your application, it will be deemed ineligible. It won't go any further in the application process if any of the following is true. So you miss the application deadline. So please remember again, for round one, 29th of May at 5:30 p.m. So if you miss the application deadline, your application will be deemed ineligible. It won't be assessed. Two is that you don't submit your completed application form through online services. So again, only use the OLS system. We don't accept applications any other way. 3, you fail to complete applications, all the sections of the application form. So make sure that every aspect of the application form is completed. 4 is that you cannot apply as set out in sections 1 to 3 to 1 to 5 of the guidance. So again, this is about the type of organization you are, the qualifying dates, and the type of activities that you're applying for. So just make sure that you qualify for those. And finally, you must provide all the mandatory supporting materials for that band. And if you don't, unfortunately, if any of those statements are true, your application is then deemed ineligible, and we will let you know that. So once you've submitted your application, the next step is how the application is processed. So we'll come back to one of the original slides here. So you'll see that once you've submitted your application through OLS before the deadline, your application goes through a series of eligibility checks. If your application is deemed ineligible, you will be notified immediately that your application is ineligible. If your application is deemed eligible, it will go forward for assessment. And once it goes forward for assessment, it is then either shortlisted or not shortlisted, depending on the score of the application, which I'll come to later. And then, depending on that score, the executive will recommend whether they're able to assist or not assist your application proposal, and that will largely be based on the score of your application and the amount of budget available. At the end of that process, all applicants will be notified of the decision. So you should receive communication at different stages of the process. The first being when you submit the application, and then at the end of the assessment process. So here you can see that in a little bit more detail. So after you submit the application, you get a notification through OLS to say that we've received the application. We check it for eligibility, and if it's not eligible, we let you know. There may be, in some cases, we read your application after eligibility checks and request that we move the application into a different art form area if we think it's more suited. If we do that, we will contact you and ask you your permission to do that. We won't do that automatically without talking to you. The application moves forward to assessment in that art form team. It is then assessed, and the application must score at least 60% and above to be recommended for funding. So anything below 60% is not recommended. Anything above 60% is recommended and moves forward. And the executive, and just to stress, it's the executive rather than a panel, makes decisions. And those funding decisions are based on the score, and applications are funded in score order until the available budget is exhausted. And then funding decisions are notified to everyone in writing. So if you're applying to round 1, your deadline is May, and you should expect a result in mid-February. And if you apply in round 2, your deadline is November, and you should expect a result in round 1 is mid-September, and round 2 is mid-February. Okay. So I'm just going to highlight here the 3 criteria areas. So when we talk about the assessment of your application, we're assessing them in 3 main areas. So this is where we apply these criteria to your application. So the first one is artistic merit and art form priorities. So as we've mentioned before, what we're specifically looking for here is the quality of your idea, how you demonstrate the artistic quality of your program, how you support individual artists in their practice, and how you support art form development. But we're also going to look at the art form priorities. So if you select, in this case, children and young people, the assessor will make sure to see that my application proposal meets with the art form priorities in that area. And you'll note here that the assessment of artistic merit and art form priorities is particularly relevant to sections 2 and 3 of the application form. So if you're looking at these slides later, the note guides you as to where the assessors will be looking for information in relation to that particular criterion. So that's criterion one. The second criteria is what we covered before, which is the priorities of the award. So that's public engagement, festival priorities, and equality and diversity. And this information that you put in your application form, the criteria is particularly relevant to sections 2, 3, and 4 of the application form and your supporting materials. So your supporting materials, which might outline your partnerships through your letters of support, that will demonstrate and evidence the festival priorities in relation to how your festival is integrated locally and also the partnerships that you have. And then the third and final area, which is the third criterion, is feasibility. So again, this is about how you manage your program, how it's financially managed, how it's organized, timetabled, planned, and delivered, how you provide equitable conditions and fair conditions for artists, and also how you evaluate it. And again, particularly relevant to sections 2, 3, 5, and 6 of the application form and the supporting materials that you provide. When your application is scored, it's scored against those three criteria areas. It gets a score out of 6 for each area, and scores play a significant part of the funding offers. So funding amounts will reflect the overall budgetary context within the Arts Council. So as before, your application is allocated funding in score order, and the scores are allocated using the scoring matrix that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen. And as before, applications must score 60% and above to be considered for funding. You shouldn't assume that if you score over 60, that you will automatically be funded, because it depends on the budgetary and the competitive context. So you could have a number of high scoring applications. So it just depends on the amount of money that we have, and the score of your application depends on whether we can support your application, but you must reach the 60% threshold. And just to point out here that not all of the criterion areas when they're scored are equal. So you should be aware that in the Festival Investment Scheme, there's a higher weighting on the priorities of the award. So the next step is the outcome of the applications. So once they've gone through that process. So if your application was eligible for assessment and it's gone through the assessment process, there are two outcomes at the end of the process. One is that your application is successful and you'll be offered a funding amount. And the second is that your application is unsuccessful and we're unable to assist you. So just to be aware that all applicants, irrespective of the outcome, are informed in writing of their application. If you're successful, we will send you a letter outlining the amount of funding that we're able to offer and also the terms and conditions of that funding. And you'll automatically be informed about how to draw down your award, and we will send you the written assessment of your application. If you're unsuccessful, we will indicate to you that we haven't been able to support you on this occasion. We will also provide you with the written assessment of your application. You can't make another application for the same proposal to another scheme, but you obviously can apply for something else because the funding schemes that the Arts Council run are open, but it would have to be for a separate proposal. So finally, and thank you for your patience, just things to consider that might be helpful. So before starting your application, it's always good to gather any materials. So that might be information about your festival, having the guidance to hand, and any evaluations that you may have done if you have run a festival before. Please read the guidance thoroughly. And if you have any questions, do come back to our team. We're very happy to clarify anything for you in the guidance. If it's confusing, we would much rather you were clear, rather than going into a process not quite understanding what's being asked of you. Please remember the language in the guidance has been very carefully considered. So again, anything that says must requires you to follow that instruction. If anything is again confusing, do get in touch with us. And please remember to leave plenty of time for your application. When you're writing the application, please pay attention to the prompts and the notes in the application form because we have written those to try and assist you and to help you actually write the best application that you can. You're asked to indicate at 2 times what your income and expenditure amounts are. So we're going to ask you to indicate that in the application form, as we've covered before, but we'll also ask you to indicate that when you put your application into OLS. So just make sure that those figures are the same on OLS as they are in the application form. And also double check that you've applied for the correct amount or the allowable amount in the band that you're applying in. And finally, your funding request from the Arts Council is your expenditure minus your income. So it's the shortfall. So again, just make sure that's how you calculate that. Don't leave any aspects of the application form blank because it renders your application ineligible. And please be really explicit and use clear language. So you should be aware that it's always best not to use jargon. Just be really clear, say what you want to do, and be very clear about what you're proposing and what you're requesting. Just be aware that the people that assess your application are peers that work in the industry. So they work in the arts and they are experts. So they may not know the work of your festival. So it's always really good to be clear and be explicit so they can understand what you're trying to do. But it's also really good for you to understand that they also understand what best practice looks like in the industry. So it's always really good for you to be very explicit. And if you have any claims in your application, it's always very good to evidence them. So if you say that, for example, your festival has been delivering a particular type of program to a particular kind of demographic for a while, it might be good to evidence that with some letters of support or some evidence that you might provide in a previous festival program. So anything you claim, you should try and evidence and also make sure that you're consistent in your application. So you will notice that there are certain sections of the application form that overlap. So if you're making a particular comment about audience development, you really want to make sure that you're consistent in that when it comes to reporting those figures or estimating those figures elsewhere in the application. And then finally, before submitting your application, remember always submit through OLS and double check that you have the mandatory support material required before you click submit. Okay, so I'm going to stop the presentation there. I might ask Regina also to stop recording for us.